So I'm going to start by telling you about the background to the project and the underlying philosophy of the whole thing. I always find it interesting that this whole story started from my experience not as a doctor, but my experience as a patient. So 5 years ago I was very unwell in hospital in ED resus with pneumonia and severe sepsis. And I was an absolute textbook case. I had all the symptoms and signs and supporting evidence. And the first doctor I met, despite overwhelming evidence that I clearly had pneumonia with severe sepsis, came to the wrong diagnosis and thought I had a pulmonary embolus and went off to organise the wrong treatment and left me without antibiotics, a potentially very serious mistake. Now we can look at these type of mistakes, and we do, and we should look at these types of mistakes, but I'm not going to talk about that now because this story is about what happened next. So the next thing that happened was I met a nurse. She was a nurse practitioner, and she was absolutely excellent. In fact, she embodied excellence. So she was compassionate and very competent in equal measure, and she got me on the right treatment after making the right diagnosis, got my antibiotics in, rapidly treated my emerging hypotension and got me packaged up and on the road to recovery. And as I started to get better over the next few weeks and then got back to work and started looking around what was going on, I realised that excellence like that is everywhere in healthcare, but you have to notice it. But we don't do that. My contention is that if we start to notice this excellence and start trying to capture it, then two things would happen. One is that we would gain new insights into how to improve quality, because we'd start trying to understand what are the conditions that led to that excellence happening. And the other thing is that the morale would increase of our staff, and never has the NHS needed a morale boost more. And the morale would increase because we'd start to appreciate excellence in our colleagues. But we don't do that, so let's hold that thought for a second and think, what is it that we actually do? When we try and improve safety and quality, we tend to look just at the things that are going wrong. And the problem with that is that every healthcare encounter is a learning opportunity, but when things are going wrong is actually a very small minority of healthcare encounters. So we've got a very narrow focus just looking at things going wrong. Bob Weir's apparently said this, trying to understand safety by only looking at incidents, and he means adverse incidents, is like trying to understand sharks by only looking at shark attacks. I think it's quite a nice analogy for saying we're only looking at a very, very narrow part of the quality spectrum. Before I go on to say what I think we should do to redress the balance, let's just spend a little bit of time thinking about why it is that we only look at the negative stuff. So as I was recovering from my illness and got back to work over the last few years, I've been reading quite a lot of books, and I've become sort of addicted to reading psychology books. And one of the things I keep coming across is this psychology of a bias towards negativity. So we have an innate negativity bias. We can't help spotting errors. There are three elements to this. We can't help spotting errors, we overvalue loss and error, and we're addicted to it. So if you don't believe we can't help spotting errors, you've already spotted at least one, maybe two errors in a sentence. And the other thing is, if you look at this, you can't help thinking if one of these sums is wrong. If you ask people, tell me about the slide, most people will say the most notable thing about this slide is one of the sums is wrong. Very few people will tell you the most notable thing about this slide is 4 of the sums are right. Okay, so we can't help spotting it, it's inbuilt, and we owe that to our evolution and our education. We also overvalue error and loss and negativity. So there's a theory called loss aversion or prospect theory, which demonstrates very nicely that we attribute more value to loss than we do to an equivalent amount of gain. So we think things are worse than they actually are. And the other thing is we're addicted to it. These are an example of some news stories from the BBC News website. If you look at any news outlet, you'll see that 80 to 90% of the news stories are negative. And these are stories that we want to read. We're fueling the media. My point is not brilliant, but look at the language that's being used. Deadly, sorry, something strange at number 3. Terrible error, stratospheric error, bug. These are all negative. So we have a negativity bias. I think the evidence is pretty clear. And what does this mean when we come back to healthcare and try and improve safety and quality? It means that if we just looking at what's going wrong all the time in our endeavour to improve quality, then we end up creating a culture of negativity. The language of safety is associated with negative connotations often. And we know there's good evidence that the second victim effect, which we'll hear a little bit about later, is exacerbated slightly by the safety investigation process. So what can we do to make it better? I think we can redress the balance by capturing some of the good practice, capturing excellence in good practice. And that will equal out the balance slightly. I'm not saying that we should stop looking at bad practice, but I think if we start capturing really good practice and excellence, we may be able to redress that balance and improve our culture. The difficulty is, how do you do that? And we're going to hear in the next presentation about what we've managed to capture. I was going to end here, but I just wanted to show you a slide I found from my Twitter feed from 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, almost exactly to the day, I sent out a tweet, having gone through this reflective process, saying, how about a formal reporting system exclusively for excellent practice? And the first two people to reply were Vin, who was the Chief Medical Officer at the time here, and Sarah Jane Marsh, who was the Chief Executive. And it shows that if you work in a supportive trust, who support innovation, you can get initiatives like this going. So that's where it all started. Okay, I'll end there. We've got a few minutes for discussion, and then it's over to Nikki.